Julia Garner stars as a struggling dancer who's drawn in by dark forces in the new psychological thriller Apartment 7A. Buy it on digital or stream it now on Paramount Plus. Rated R. Head to ParamountPlus.com/Apartment7A to try it free.
Most tax pros leave a message.
It's Jane. I'm moving on to a TurboTax expert who beat your price. Adam Devine, tell him how I feel.
Hey, tax pro, she's been thinking twice. Best believe TurboTax will beat your price. This is a tax day.
Switch to a TurboTax Live expert and we'll beat what you paid your pro last tax season. Make the switch at TurboTax.com/beat your price. TurboTax full service only. Sign up by 12/20/2024 and file by 4/1/2025. Full details at TurboTax.com/beat your price.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Slashers, huh? What's your favorite scary movie?
Not that one.
Hello, everyone. Holding it back. Sorry. My name is Trace.
Oh, and I'm Joe. Sorry, I was keeping an eye on him.
Oh, he was afraid I was going to introduce myself as Joe, which has happened before. And we are the Horror Queers, part of Bloody FM, formerly the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. And we are here to talk about...
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about 10 years of queer horror here at Fantastic Fest. And then at the end, well, the back half, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive onto one film specifically.
But we're not going to tell you what that is.
It's true, yeah.
So you don't leave. So we're basically doing what I've been telling people is a listicle in podcast format for this first half. And we are going to start 10 years ago in 2014. So we had quite a few queer horror films that year. We had things like The Duke of Burgundy, Kevin Smith's Tusk, It Follows, and the Town That Dreaded Sundown remake sequel thing. Of course, some of these things have very explicit queer content, but other things are more queer readings, things like that. But the one we wanted to focus on for that was actually The Babadook, which, again, not explicitly queer, but I don't know if y'all know this, but like that, The Babadook became like a queer icon, I want to say like 5 years after its release.
I don't think it was that long, but yeah, it was one of those random things where the internet gobbled up a film, spat it out in a different context, and all of a sudden, yeah, we got, like a glittery Babadook doing some song and dance.
It was, so I tried to look this up, and basically what happened was that some Tumblr user said the Babadook is gay, and then Netflix put the Babadook in their LGBTQ category on their algorithm, and it kind of became like this viral sensation. And then, yeah, I mean, like a drag queen, I think it's an LA-based drag queen, Pissy Miles. She made a music video called Baba Shook, which you should all go watch because it's really, really quite funny. And she's like dragged out as the Babadook. But I guess I want to talk about this because, I don't know, it's something that, again, is not inherently queer. It's very much a depressing movie about grief and trauma and shit. But how, I don't know, like the queer community can take something and reappropriate it as a positive, like, mascot for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of our longstanding tradition where, as the queer community, we embrace villains, and I think we see ourselves in it. And it's an especially unusual one for me because there's nothing inherently, like, sassy or flamboyant. The Babadook, I mean, I guess he's kind of creeping around.
Wait, have you rewatched it since this thing happened?
I have not.
I haven't either. Full disclosure, I actually, the first time I saw it, I was underwhelmed. But I like it now. I think he's got some fun stop-motion-y movements that make him a little sassy.
Just a little limp-wristed sassy boy, is that what you're saying?
Okay. Limp-wristed. I think that's a slur.
It is now. You heard it here first.
But no, I mean, like, it's a thing where I think because that movie was kind of really, really popular. It kind of came out before A24 started monopolizing that brand of horror, I feel like.
Are you speaking of
No, I'm not talking about
horror?
elevated horror. We're not doing that. But I don't know. I just think about all the little queer kids who might have watched this movie and they're all of a sudden they're like, oh, look, like, I want to be like that thing.
I mean, better to be like the Babadook than that little boy, because, oh boy. That's the main reason we haven't rewatched that movie.
No.
Full disclosure.
He might have a disability. I don't want to...
You know what? He needed to be loved.
That's fine. Okay, moving on to 2015. We have a smaller selection from that year. That was actually my first year at Fantastic Fest, and the first movie that comes to mind for us was a Polish film called Demon. And that was actually my very first screening at this festival. But we wanted to focus on what is a 5-star film for both me and Joe, and that is Karin Kusama's The Invitation.
Truly a fantastic film. We selected this as our 150th? 200th episode. We have lost track of what films we have covered.
Episode 250 comes out next week, so...
Also a big one, yeah. But this is the kind of film where you go into it thinking, okay, I'm not really sure what's going on at this special dinner. It's...
Wait. Who has not seen The Invitation? Okay, we're not going to spoil it.
We won't spoil it.
But it toes that line of genre where, I wouldn't necessarily call it a horror movie, but like it is, well, it's an anxiety-inducing film. It's a dinner party gone awry, let's just say that.
Yes, not everyone is who they appear to be, and the reasons for the dinner are revealed slowly.
Yes, but we wanted to focus on it because there's a gay couple in this movie. And I mean, even in 2015, like, I feel like I was kind of like, I just don't see this very often. And, well, this is kind of the one thing we're going to spoil. One of them does survive the movie. And that's something I wasn't used to seeing, especially in the horror genre.
Yeah, and unless your main character is a queer person. And back in even 2014, 2015, this was not a common practice. So getting a supporting queer character who makes it through to the end felt like a big accomplishment.
Yeah, but also it's just a fucking fantastic
it's a great movie. Okay, so moving on to 2016, very, very good year here at the Fest for queer horror.
What's the first one you have on your list?
Okay, so we have Trace's favorite movie, Raw.
I respect it. I love it. I have I have not been able to connect with either of Julia Ducournau's films. It's a film, I walk out both thinking, yeah, I see why people like it. They're not for me.
Yeah, so he's just wrong. It's a 5-star movie, literally one of the best to come out of France in the last decade. He's just incorrect in every way.
That's fine. I'll accept that.
Yeah. Also 2016, we have Better Watch Out, which is the evil Home Alone movie.
Queer director on that one. Yeah. So whenever we cover films for our podcast, we used to be really strict about it. Like, oh, it has to have explicit queer content. But honestly, when you start doing research on these films, you find, especially in older films, you find that there's so many queer creators doing things. So we're going back to like all the way to the 30s and 40s with James Whale, inserting queer coding into his films. But yeah, so we got a queer director, even if there's nothing in Better Watch Out explicitly queer, although it deals with a lot of toxic masculinity, which I think is prevalent in queer culture as much as it is straight culture.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, we like to shine a light on those queer creators.
Yeah. A film that is not a queer director, but is very, very queer is The Handmaiden from Korea.
Yep.
And then speaking of Poland, they're back with The Lure. So we've got lesbian-coded mermaids.
Musicals.
Yeah, folks, if you have not seen The Lure, it is a true banger.
It's great. My husband hated it, though. I know.
So bizarre.
He didn't like the music.
But also, we can't, say anything bad about him because today is technically his birthday.
Anyway, But what we're going to talk about is...
Yes. So the one that we selected, we decided to highlight one film from each year just to give it a bit of an amplification. In some cases, it's a film we really, really like. Mm-hmm. And in other cases, it's a film that we thought was a little underseen. So the film that we chose for 2016 to highlight is The Untamed, which is from Mexico. And it's a really interesting, tentacle monster
I don't want to oversell it because I feel like a lot of the marketing for this movie push it as the tentacle porn movie because it's about this alien monster who fucks people and it gives them the best orgasms of their lives. And once they reach their peak, it kills them.
Well, and it also ruins any kind of human relationship that they could ever have because nothing will ever compare. Sidebar, the practical effects on the creature are really, really great. So even though you want a little bit more, what you do see is quite good.
But it's very much like the tentacle monster is kind of like, it's a backdrop of the film for a lot of deeper conversations happening. Again, toxic masculinity coming up again in Mexican culture, and specifically homophobia, because you kind of start the film off as with a gay man as your protagonist. Mm-hmm. I think an issue that I have with this film is that we see the tentacle sex with a lot of the women in the film. We don't see the tentacle sex with the gay man before he is killed off about halfway through the movie.
Yeah, and this is something that we've discovered happens more often than we care to, I guess.
I appreciate the bone we are being thrown as queer viewers to be like, hey, like, look, we have this queer character prominently featured in your movie. But what I find a lot, I think it's getting a little bit better, is that we don't often see queer sex in these movies. And not saying I need like full, like, you know, doggy style fucking in this movie, but I'm just saying if you're showing this tentacle monster like inserting into every female orifice, I kind of wanted to see it happen for the gay man, since again, like, he kind of is the protagonist of the film up to a certain point.
Yeah. We're very pro-sex on the podcast, and also it's one of those things where we want to see sexuality represented on screen. We're very pro-sex in a lot of different ways.
But I think the issue there too, I mean, again, not an issue, but the director of that film, as far as I can tell, is not a queer man. And I do think that when we are seeing queer creators doing queer horror, we're starting to see more sexuality in those films.
Yes, it also helps that, I mean, we're talking about the last 10 years at the festival, but one of the things that I feel like we've discovered is that as increasingly more streaming sites, more opportunities for films to be shown, we start to see different kinds of outlets that are more comfortable screening sex.
Streamers are better about it. I mean, unfortunately, mainstream, like, theaters are dying anyway, so whatever. But
welcome back to the theater, everyone.
I mean, you know, besides this one. But no, I mean, I'm trying to think of the last like mainstream like a queer horror film that went to theaters. Ugh. That's a hard pressed question.
I don't know. Maybe we'll find one on the list later. We'll see.
Anyway, Seek Out the Untamed, though, it's a really fascinating film, but it's very much a drama that happens to have a tentacle monster in it.
Yeah, he said that really fast, so I'm just going to say it slowly. It's The Untamed.
What did I say?
The Untamed.
Oh. So moving into 2017, again, another decent year for queer horror. We have the holiday musical Anna and the Apocalypse, which features, there's a lesbian character in that movie, or maybe a non-binary character, actually.
I believe lesbian, but yeah, arguably she's also the best character, which is the other fun thing. If we can't have the lead, we might as well be the best character in the film.
I like the girl that plays Anna, but yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about boring protagonist syndrome a lot because a lot of times in especially horror films, the main character is normally the least interesting one.
Well, they're sad. They have issues. They've got to go through the ringer. Whereas the best friend is out there being like, hey, who wants to get laid and do drugs?
But on the flip side, though, they don't have an arc, whereas the protagonist has an arc, which, again, normally, this is like a generalization, but like it's the boring part of the film.
All right, move us on.
Moving on to, so I've never seen this one actually, but you keep telling me this. The another mermaid movie, blew my mind.
Yeah, so, I can't remember which country this is from. I want to say it's a Nordic country, but looking for validation. No? Okay. No. This is a really good coming-of-age queer horror film. So, yeah, it's about a girl who is maybe turning into a mermaid, but she's also in love with her best friend. If you like ginger snaps, I strongly recommend this one.
Okay. Next up is one of my favorites, actually. So this is a Brazilian werewolf lesbian movie called Good Manners. And even though I think it's nearly a 2.5 hour runtime, this is an amazing film. And it features female sexuality, lesbian sexuality, front and center. Which, again, I think that's something that we often see a lot more than queer male sexuality.
Yeah, there's still a double standard, I think, which is a weird thing to say when you're like, oh, we want to see more boobs and also penis. But the reality is that we just see a lot more of one than the other. It's the same thing with The Handmaiden, where the sexuality in that film, I think, confronted a lot of people, but people were seemingly more okay with it because it was two women.
Well, but also that's a male director on that film. And I think that's something that people like to talk about a lot. Although it's so funny. We covered The Handmaiden for our show, and I had it in my mind that scissoring wasn't a thing that lesbians do, and I had a lesbian correct me.
You know what? He's just so young, and he's got so much to learn.
I'm not a lesbian. Anyway, next up is a queer horror film. This is Erlinger Thordarsson's Rift, which I think is in the process of getting an American remake.
Rumored, yeah. The pandemic did fuck up a lot of things, so we're still waiting to see if that's a go.
This is an Icelandic film. Beautiful scenery. A man goes to visit his a summer home, and it's like the ghost of his boyfriend might or might not be there, kind of a thing. Yeah.
It's sad, it's good, it's beautiful. It just makes you want to go to Iceland and maybe fall in a crevice.
Yeah. We also have the film Thelma, which is kind of a Carrie light film. You really like this one.
I mostly like this one. I have some issues with the end of it, but overall, it's a really great film, and obviously, people now know who the director is. This is his one sort of sidestep into horror. He usually makes dramas, so
I would argue this is yes. But we're gonna focus on for this one, My Friend Dahmer, and this is a film that's based on a graphic novel / comic book of the same name, starring. Oh my God, is it Garrett? It's Garrett. No, Ross Lynch. Yes. Sorry, we were having this discussion before. I was like, it's Garrett Clayton. No, he's the one that played Brent Corrigan in that King Cobra movie. This is interesting, though, because this is about Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. And, of course, we all know Jeffrey Dahmer was gay. The Ryan Murphy Netflix show, I think, stirred a lot of controversy last year about how in poor taste it was. And I have mixed thoughts about that. But with this film specifically, I find it interesting because, it's not about Dahmer killing people. It's not about the victims, which you could argue is maybe a problem. Yeah. But it's just about him being a teenager. And there are queer scenes in the film. I don't think we actually get to see him have sex again.
No.
But I like this because it's also a Disney star who is playing this type of role.
Yeah, Disney likes to break bad every once in a while, so.
Well, no, I mean, the stars do, because they don't want to be pigeonholed into this, family shit.
Yes, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. Disney does not break bad, unless, they're lucky to not pay their writers and actors.
But do you like this movie?
I actually really, really like this movie. I have read the comic as well, and it's a very, very faithful adaptation.
Is it a one-off, or is it like a series?
It's a one-off.
Okay. Yeah. I think people were just taken aback because I think they were expecting a serial killer movie, and that's not what we got. So I appreciated the sidestep approach. It doesn't delve too deeply into Dahmer's queerness outside of a few scenes that hint at it, because I think he's still discovering himself in that film. He's questioning, yes. But again, definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen this one.
Yeah, it's quite good. Okay, so
we
moved the dial forward to 2018, and this is arguably one of the best years for queer horror at the festival. You could argue it's also one of the best years for horror in general in recent years. So our fun list includes things like Cam, which is the sex work doppelganger film, which if you've not seen it, it's basically bisexual lighting, the movie.
It's really, really fucking good.
Yeah. Border is one that I have not seen, but Trace has reassured me it has some interesting sexuality, which we don't necessarily want to spoil.
I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, it's about it's almost like a TSA officer who is not attractive by conventional standards, and she meets another person who is just like her, and so you have your kind of queer reading in that they are literally queer, as opposed to the gay queer. But it turns out there's something more beneath it. And there's a huge trans reading in this. But again, I don't want to spoil it too much. So seek out Border. It's definitely streaming somewhere.
Yeah. We also have in 2018 Climax, which is the French dance movie where everybody accidentally trips on LSD and then they have a really bad time.
So there's a queer character in this movie, and he has
there's more than one, but there's one specifically.
There's one specific gay, like a twink boy, and he kind of gets a little subplot. But my issue with this film, which I love this film, but it's a one and done. You'll watch it and you're like, I never want to see that again.
So prescriptive. If you want to watch it a second time, watch it a second time.
You can watch it a second time, but it's really stressful to watch. Because if you don't know what Climax is, it's basically like a dance troupe is doing a rehearsal and someone spikes their punch with LSD. So it's but my issue with this movie is that this character who you think is going to get kind of his own arc, he just disappears from the movie in the last act. And not because he dies, the movie just forgets about him.
Yeah, it's like the movie took LSD and kind of forgot about certain characters.
There are 30 characters in this movie.
There's a lot,
to be fair.
And the movie's very trippy, so it's almost less about the characters in some ways. But yeah, it's always a little disappointing when you think, oh, maybe this person will get to do something interesting. And the answer is no.
Yeah.
No.
Next up is Lords of Chaos, which is a movie. It's based on a true story about a band that's like a death metal band. But there's the queer aspect of this movie is that there is a very brutal gay bashing scene in this film. And it came out around the same time as It Chapter 2, which also opens with a gay bashing scene. And I remember a lot of discourse at the time around the necessity of scenes like that and how it's too triggering, too traumatizing for viewers. And while I understand that, my personal viewpoint on showing things like that is that, and maybe you disagree, is that I think it's necessary to show that kind of a hate crime like that to people, because I feel like what I hear a lot from people on the right side of the spectrum of politics is that we're fine now. The queer community is fine. We're good. We've got more rights than we ever have before, so therefore it's fine. And I think showing scenes like that shows people that, no, it's not all fine, especially given the anti-trans legislation and all the violence against our trans brethren. I don't know. I get that it's triggering. I understand that, but I don't think we should censor our art from things like that.
Well said. Yeah, I think there's a time and a place also for something like a content warning, so people can at least walk into something anticipating or knowing that they may have to deal with something confronting. But yeah, as soon as we start saying there's no place for something, then that means we're maybe censoring our art.
Yeah.
Okay. Also this year is one of Trace and my favorite films, is The Perfection, which is basically the lesbians break bad against their, what is it, violin?
No. Yeah, no, it's cello. It's cello playing. If you have never seen this, it is streaming on Netflix. This is a 5-star film for me, and it does take a lot of cues from Korean cinema, specifically The Handmaiden. It's Allison Williams from Girls, and I forgot her other name, but it's fine. Yeah. But nevertheless, again, it's one of those movies where the twists happen so early and on, but it's a very explicitly queer lesbian film. And let's say something like Bound, it's a film that gives queers their, well, maybe I don't want to say happy ending, but the happiest ending given the events of the film.
Always with the caveats and the asterisks, right? Okay. Also, we're still in 2018, in case you were trying to keep track. It's a big year. So there's a French film that I don't think most people have seen called School's Out, which is a substitute teacher who has to deal with a bunch of unruly kids, but that character is explicitly queer, and it's not really made a big deal out of. We also have Starfish.
Wait, can you explain why that's significant? Like why it's important that their queerness is not made a big deal out of?
It's one of those cases where I think sometimes people are hungry for representation where the character just is queer, but being queer is not a focal point of the story. So it's a facet of the character, but at the end of the day, it's not what the film is built around.
Yeah, I think like an example from this year from mainstream, like Evil Dead Rise, there's a trans actor in that movie. Right. But the character in the film, as far as I know, is not trans. If they are, it's not even mentioned. And I think that's, again, when talking about representation, I like it when it's pointed out. I like it when it's there and, like, you know, we're making a big deal, for lack of a better term, out of it. But I also like it when it's just like, yeah, like these are just queer people living their normal daily existences.
Yeah. We like a variety of different types of representation. Well, sometimes we want it to be like, yeah, no, I'm really fucking queer.
Hammer us over the head with it.
Things. Like, just give it to us.
But I like the sneaky ones, though, because then you'll have someone who's really conservative watch the film and say they really like it. And like, well, you know, that's a gay person. And they're like, that's really fun.
Truly, yeah.
Starfish.
Starfish is a very quiet little film about a girl who just, like, basically is having a rough go in a small town.
She just starfishes?
No. Clearly, Trace has not seen this one.
I haven't seen it.
No, this is a lovely one. I almost equate this to like a music video style film because it's principally one actress and she's just out there kind of trying to survive. But it's lovely and gently queer.
So next up is the remake of Suspiria. And I'm curious, Joe, what is the queer aspect of this movie?
Everything. The gayest dance movie I've ever seen, and I fucking love it.
The fuck eyes that Tilda Swinton and Dakota Johnson are giving each other throughout this 2.5-hour masterpiece.
I mean, one of the jokes that Trace and I often have is like any kind of lesbian or bisexual female representation. The movie is always like, look at their mouths, look at their hands. You're just like, yes, we know that lesbians do things with hands, but also like, it doesn't have to be so obvious.
Yeah, but also directed by Luca Guadagnino, so also a queer director in that scenario.
Yes, yeah.
But we want to focus, we focus on a lot of these actually, but we really want to focus on what I think is possibly one of our absolute favorite queer horror films of all time. And this is Jan Gonzalez's queer Knife Plus Heart, which is set in the world of 70s gay pornography as a masked, closeted, maybe, serial killer is killing off its gay porn actors.
Yeah. How many folks have seen Knife Plus Heart?
Oh, good.
Oh, good
You're homeworkers. I love it.
Yeah, the reason that we love this one is it's a queer director-writer in Jan Gonzalez, but then the lead actress is, the lead character.
Vanessa Paradis.
Yeah, Vanessa Paradis is a lesbian who's having she's having a shit relationship with the editor on her movies, but then there's a bunch of gay for pay actors, there's gay actors
actual
on the
gayness.
Films. There's trans friends who are kicking around, and it's also a weirdo giallo with a bunch of shit that happens in the woods.
Well, and the killer kills people with a bladed dildo, so it's right out of 7, and they're violent death scenes.
Yes.
But I think also that it goes back into the conversation about violence against queer people. I remember seeing some people balk at this a little bit in this film when it came out. But again, for me, I'm kind of the whole movie's gay. You got to kill some of them.
Yeah, because if not, then you end up in one of those situations where it's it's a horror film where no one dies.
But I think this is so full disclosure for me, I'm not a person who really meshes with giallo very well. I like the style of it, but I often have problems with the narrative, and I do think that Knife Plus Heart dips into some of its worst tendencies in the back half, where we it's a meandering narrative where we go off on some random side gig that kind of is important, but kind of isn't, and you could cut it out and make the movie 20 minutes shorter. But
it's a little surreal, and sometimes Trey struggles with that.
Yeah.
Yes,
but nevertheless, though, I this is something I caught here at its screening, and I was blown away by this film.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you've not sought out Jan Gonzalez's other work, he makes a bunch of experimental shorts. They're always incredibly queer, and it's just it's a really good time.
Yeah. Okay, so moving into 2019. So I don't know if y'all know this, but this is our second live show here. We were in the Highball back in 2019 doing a live performance on A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, with Mark Patton in attendance. We learned really quickly not to poke fun at that movie because he abruptly stopped us about 2 minutes into the episode and said, don't do that. So all of our notes for that episode went out. But we have Tammy and the T-Rex. This is something I actually didn't catch at Fantastic Fest that year. I saw this very recently, and I saw it, and I was like, Joe, we have to cover this fucking movie. It's so fucking good. But we have a black queer character. In case you don't know what Tammy and the T-Rex is, by the way, this is Denise Richards and Paul Walker are in love. He gets killed. His brain puts in the body of an animatronic T-Rex and is brought to life, and they have adventures. But Denise Richards' best friend is this queer black character, and because 1994, I do think we're dipping our toes into just stereotypical gay best friend territory.
Yes.
And while there are characters, specifically this character's father, his father's friends, his cop friends who make fun of him, I don't think the film ever treats him negatively. And so that's what I find refreshing about this film when I watch it.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting paradox because in some regards, it is that stereotypical best friend where you want more from them. This is a character who is kind of sexless. They don't have an arc, but also as much as they're a stereotype on one hand, they're still breaking conventions because his whole his part in the back half of the film is instrumental in the success of these characters accomplishing their goals.
Yeah, and even though he is there to support Denise Richards and her relationship with Paul T-Rex Walker, it's just he has agency on his own.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
We've also got Knives and Skin. So this is... How would you describe this movie?
This is another one that's very musically based, but plot, I don't want to say light.
It's like a neo-noir of sorts, though.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah, but a lot of queer characters in this film. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm going back to 2018. We missed Assassination Nation.
Oh, we did. I didn't know it played here.
Yeah, wait, did it play here? No? Oh, fuck, never mind. Well, it's really good.
Not a survey of all queer horror choices, just the ones that played at the festival.
I could do this all day. But no, Knives and Skin, it's a typical, like, a girl goes missing, and it's less so about solving what happened to her and more so about...
it's not about that at all.
How her disappearance affects this entire town.
Yeah, I know a lot of people call it gently Lynchian because it's a small town with secrets and characters who are going through shit behind closed doors. But it's very atmospheric, I'll say that. And I really like the way it uses music.
Yes.
Trace has nothing further to contribute on that because he doesn't do music.
I do musicals, whatever. So this next one, I missed this at Fantastic Fest, and I heard so many good things about it. Deerskin.
Yes. So Deerskin is another one of these films where you look at it and you say, is it really queer? But I would say any film where a man is being told to murder people because his leather deerskin jacket is telling him to. It's a very wry comedy. It's kind of dry. It's French, so that maybe explains a lot of it. But I think that this movie is so fun and interesting, and it's very stylish in a lot of different ways. But yeah, I mean, this is basically a man's love affair with his jacket, the movie.
Which is queer in and of itself. The big one that year, though, I think, again, so this is the documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And even though I might have done a subtle dig at Mark Patton, it's when you watch this movie... It's really sad to see all the shit that he went through and how that movie really deeply affected his career. So it makes sense why he wouldn't want to poke fun at this movie when I think people over the past 30, 40 years have been making fun of that movie and blaming him for its failures. And that's absolutely not the case. He was even thrown under the bus by the director of the film.
Which is in the documentary. It's, I think, one of the things that we get frustrated with about that doc is that it's treated like it's this big, satisfying moment where Mark Patton gets to confront Jack Shoulder. And I so desperately want him. No, sorry, it's the writer, not the director. But I want more from that. I want more from Mark Patton.
Here's the thing. So it's the thing like Roman and Tyler, the director of that movie, it's clear that they wanted to set up a narrative where it's like, hey, we're going to have this story of Mark Patton. He's going to meet with the writer-director of the film, and they're going to kind of like
hash it out.
I think the only fault in that movie, yes, is it's something they can't even control, is that it feels like they forced them to get in a room with this man. And they don't really make up for anything. Like, it feels very much like Mark Patton's like, okay. But I think it works because Mark gets closure from it, even though we as an audience, I don't think get closure from that conversation.
Yeah, and truly it should be more about him because it's his journey.
Yeah, and he's good, then we're good.
Right, yeah. And the other good thing about that doc is that I think it helped a lot of people understand why possibly the most maligned, or one of the most maligned.
People love it now.
Yeah.
It's cool to like it now.
It helped people to gain an appreciation of a film that a lot of folks wanted to write off in the franchise.
And honestly, I think my only issue with that movie is just that it just feels the most separate from the rest of the films, like narratively speaking. But I like how queer, intentionally or not, that movie is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Give me weird dogs with Freddy's face on them any day.
And then the straight power of love saves the day.
Okay, less of that, though. Okay, so we're moving into 2020, and this is a bit of a shorter year. We're starting to, I guess, anticipate the pandemic. Maybe not. That's a broad statement. So,
this is the virtual year.
This year or the next year?
No, it's 2020 because This is The Boy Behind the Door.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the reason we're going to go with why there's only a couple titles. But so we have The Stylist. There we go. It's a stylish movie. That's me making up for it. It's about a haircutter who has an obsession with one of her clients, whether it's about her hair, whether she wants this woman's life, whether she wants this woman. You have to see the film to decide for yourself. But I think this is a pretty solid adaptation of a short, and it's exciting to see creators who can take, like, oh, here's a proof of concept and turn it into a film.
Well, because I think the thing that troubles a lot of shorts that are made into a feature film is that more often than not, and maybe that's too much of a broad generalization, they feel like a short stretched to feature length. And do you feel that way about this one?
This one, if you didn't know it was based on a short, you would feel fine about it. If you've seen the short, you feel like, okay, the film does that.
That's the short as a film.
But one of the things I really appreciate about the film is that it doesn't remove the queer sexuality, which would have been a very easy thing to do when you're dealing with financing for a feature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we also have the Daughters of Darkness restoration in 2020, which is one of our favorite classic queer films.
This is an early episode for us, too.
Early-ish.
Maybe second year.
It's the movie that will make you want to seek out a silver glittery cape and just like prance around the house.
Yeah. This is a very, very, very good vampire film. And it's so fucking pretty.
It's just really stylish, yeah. So we also have, as Trace mentioned, The Boy Behind the Door, which is one of those films where I think we sometimes worry we're going to get in trouble for covering it because we read the relationship between the two boys as queer. And of course, people who don't like queers like to then say, oh, you're sexualizing infants. You're doing that thing.
Yeah, I always feel, God, what did we just discuss recently? Oh, the Chucky TV show where I was like, I almost, like, I don't. It's not inappropriate, but I feel like people who don't like aren't in our like wavelength will feel like it's weird to talk about like young boys being gay. But it's like it's not all about sex when it comes to that. Like I knew I was gay when I was under the age of a teenager. Doesn't mean I was having sex. I just knew. And so even though it's not explicitly queer that these boys, it's not explicitly stated that these boys are queer, I think it's really easy to make that reading in this film.
Yeah. It's about the power of male friendship.
Also, Pam from True Blood's in it.
Yeah. Not enough, though. You want more from her.
No, but she's really good when she's in it.
Okay, so the film we're going to talk a little bit longer about in 2020 is Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor. And, of course, son following in father's footsteps with a truly weird, wild tale. Possessor's kind of snuck up on me in the last couple of years as to how much I truly just absolutely fucking love that movie.
I think it's a film that rewards rewatchability 100%. But if you haven't seen Possessor, this is a film in which, Andrea Riseborough has a job where her mind is put in the body of someone else and she has to carry out assassinations. But the bulk of this film, she's in the body of, I think it's Josh Abbott? A man. And so it's about how this woman is in the body of a man and has a penis. No? What?
You got the last name is right.
Okay.
But yeah, Possessor's just like...
Christopher Abbott. There we go.
Thank you. Yes. It's an incredibly stylish, well-made film that dips into... It's got a little bit of surrealism and...
we see the dick.
I was going to say, we also see some nudity, which is... I think the movie understands how to use male nudity. Like, we see it also in Infinity Pool, like the power of nudity.
Okay, but we see like a full-on ejaculation in Infinity Pool. Like that's something.
Well, if you saw that cut, you do.
I think, no, they released that cut, though. I think they released it. Yeah. Anyway. But that's the same with Possessor, though. But I think Possessor was only released, like, uncut. No pun intended. He's cut in the film.
I mean...
I'm sorry, the prosthetic is cut in the film.
Shall I get you a shovel so you can dig yourself a little deeper?
It's fine. No, but I mean, like, again, it's because the sex scene, God, I want to say it's a straight sex scene because it's between the man and a woman. But again, it's Andrea Riseborough in that head. So it adds these extra layers to it that I think are just really fascinating. I've seen that movie 3 times, and I think I get something more out of it every time I watch it. But I would love to, I want to talk to a trans person about it to see, like, how that affects them. Is that the right term I want to say? Or how they read it, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, the latter. For sure.
Yeah.
All right, so take us into 2021.
All right, 2021. We have, queer horror film. I don't know why I'm like labeling it queer horror film. These are all queer horror. Alone with You. And this is in which a woman is, the whole thing takes place in her apartment as she's in a fight with her girlfriend, and it's kind of a paranoid thriller type thing where she kind of like she starts to lose her mind, and you of course slowly start to realize that things may not have been so pleasant between her and her girlfriend. I like this one. It's definitely one that I think I want to see what this can do with a bigger budget, and maybe where we're not just in this apartment, although the production design I think is really good. Yeah,
this is a tricky one because they definitely made it during the pandemic, so it falls into that class of film where you're like, oh, people were able to get 5 people together, shoot in somebody's apartment. The production values do look really good. So it's not as though you're watching somebody, shoot it on, well, I guess you can shoot on their phone and still look good. Anyway.
I mean, yeah, Steven Soderbergh shot Unsane on his phone.
He loves to bring up Unsane because
he hasn't seen it. And it's really good.
Helpful. Let's talk about it at the live show.
It's not queer though.
Not queer. Yeah, I guess all things to say about this is that I think my issue with it is that there was a section of time where we saw a bunch of queer horror titles where it was basically a woman having either a mental breakdown or something was actually happening to her. And I just find that I get a little tired of those kinds of stories. It's hard to innovate them. So, I saw this, I saw Knocking, I saw Censor, and they're all around that same time period. They're all good movies in their own right, but I can't help but compare them to each other.
Well, and this wasn't a Fantastic film. This is a South by Southwest film. But piggybacking off of that, there's a movie called Hypochondriac about a gay man that I think delves into the similar territory where it's like, oh, is he losing his mind? What's going on? I think that film's a little bit more successful than Alone with You at doing that, but also seek that one out. It's good. This isn't a horror film, but it is a Paul Verhoeven film, and we have his lesbian period piece nun movie, Benedetta. Paul Verhoeven is a director I really respect and admire. Even his bad films I think are interesting, but I like that he's able to push buttons, and he always has sexuality front and center, and he has never been a stranger to queerness.
No, indeed. Yeah, he's packed it into quite a few of his films, hasn't he?
Just a few. What about the slasher movie, There's Someone Inside Your House?
Yeah, this one isn't my favorite. I prefer other Patrick Brice films, but this is kind of a fun, YA horror film. And in some ways, I think it's successful. But this is one of those ones where you're like, yeah, if we're going to make films about a certain age demographic, it's, I think, quite easy to say, oh, and they've got a queer friend.
I think we're seeing that more and more and more and more. Like if we're having, especially with Gen Z kids, almost always one of them is going to be queer in some shape, way, or form.
Yeah.
Will they have the best character arc or story or whatever? Case-by-case basis.
We wait to see. One that I would say is a little bit more successful.
Yeah.
Is the Slumber Party Massacre remake.
This movie rocks.
It's so fucking good. People wanted to write it off because they thought...
It was a sci-fi movie. It was a sci-fi movie premiere, and I confess, I went in with very low expectations, and I'm not blown away, but I had so much fun with this movie.
Yeah, this is just one of those films where there's a hint of queer sexuality, particularly in the way that we get to see the boys showering as opposed to the girls.
And the boys have a pillow fight, a slow motion pillow fight.
Yeah. So it's very playful in that sense. And I think that's we can do deep and dark. Hypochondriac is a great example of just holy shit, this movie. I think I need to go on antidepressants because it's really moody. And then you can contrast that with something like the Slumber Party Massacre remake, where you're just oh, this film is a blast. Cool. What a palate cleanser.
Mm-hmm.
The new psychological thriller Apartment 7A is now streaming on Paramount+. Julia Garner stars as a struggling young dancer who suffers a devastating injury. Soon, she finds herself drawn in by dark forces when a peculiar, well-connected older couple promises her a shot at fame. Diane Wiest, Kevin McNally, and Jim Sturgis also star in the Paramount Plus original movie. Buy Apartment 7A on digital or stream it now on Paramount Plus. Rated R. Head to ParamountPlus.com/Apartment7A to try it free.
ABC Wednesdays.
Y'all complain all day. We want books. We want paper towels in the classroom. Bet you want raises, too.
I'm still waiting on the paper towels.
Abbott Elementary returns with a new season.
We asked the district for more after-school programs. They gave us $50 for class pets instead.
Critics cheer. Abbott Elementary continues to be one of the funniest and most beloved shows on TV.
What y'all doing out there?
Taking bribes.
Proud of y'all.
Abbott Elementary, Wednesdays, 9:30, 8:30 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So, but the big one for us is another Julia Ducournau film, and we are talking about Titan, which again I think has a really strong trans reading into it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how many folks have seen Titan?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Not bad. Not bad. So, yeah, this is about a troubled woman who kind of has to go on the run, and she ends up assuming a man's identity, and she spends most of the film pretending to be this fireman's, like, fire captain's son.
Yeah.
And it's
wild.
It is. Part of the fun is discovering, like, how does she get away with it? Does she actually get away with it?
But she also fucks cars.
That's the other selling feature of the film.
Which is, again, queer in and of itself. Literally queer, but, you know, you have that metaphor there.
Yeah. I quite like it as well. So.
I admire it. I respect it. Not for me.
One of these days, we're going to find a Julia Ducournau film that Grace
I will
loves.
always go see her next film because if nothing else, I find her interesting and fascinating.
Sidebar, she does direct a number of episodes of Apple TV's Servant, and those are some of the best episodes of that series.
Servant fucking rocks.
Yeah. Lauren Ambrose, Toby Kebbell, Rupert Grint.
Rupert Grint playing against type. He's not Ron Weasley anymore.
No. Okay, that's a different podcast again. So we'll move into 2022, which I would say, apart from 2018, is probably the
biggest.
Strongest year.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it's like we're still kind of coming out of the pandemic, quote unquote.
Yeah. We're still in it.
I mean, so maybe we'll start with the most pandemic-based queer horror film of the year, which is Kevin Williamson's Sick.
Of course, Kevin Williamson being the queer co-screenwriter of that film.
Yes.
Not really any explicit queerness, but that movie is, again, a thrill ride that has a very, very heavy COVID-y message at the end of it.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, it's quite... Yeah, thrill ride is a great description of it.
But then we also have the remake/reboot of Hellraiser, which I quite like, although it does kind of remove any and all queerness that the original film had, which is, I think, why it's on this list.
Well, one could argue that it removes all sexuality because that film is not particularly interested in deviant sex or queers, but at least it's not saying, oh, we're getting rid of the queerness and we're just going to focus on straight people. There is a sex scene, and it's fine.
That's such a weird, like, trade-off. Like, oh, it's like they remove all sex, not just the queer sex, so it's, like, not as bad, which I guess is true, but...
I mean, yes, the main reason to watch this movie, not just because it's like gorgeous and interesting and a little bit weird, but if you walk away from this and you're not a fan of Jamie Clayton taking over as the Hell
Oh my God.
Lady,
I'm sitting here like, there's no queerness in this movie. There's a fucking trans actress playing Pinhead. I'm sorry, the Hell Priestess.
Yes. And she fucking
rules.
Rocks
Best
it.
part of the movie.
Yeah.
Best part of the movie.
The fact that we don't have a physical media release or a sequel makes me very upset.
Yeah.
I was going to be more dramatic, and then I'm like, no, you can just say you're upset. Okay.
Next up, we have a smaller film that came out last year called Attachment. And this is, again, it's similar to Alone with You and Me. It's very small scale, but I really, really like this movie a lot.
Yeah, so this is our crossover into Jewish horror.
Which we're seeing a lot more of nowadays, too.
Yes, it's called diversity and representation, and we love it. I mean, the interesting thing is that you could go into this film and say, the storytelling is, like, fine, right? Like, it's a kind of familiar story. What elevates it is the fact that it's both queer and Jewish, and that's still, unfortunately, something of a novelty. So it was an exciting film to get to catch after all that time. I'd say this and Hussera are probably some of the best, foreign films that are dealing with, like, familiar storytelling.
But I don't think Attachment had a very high profile release, so not a lot of people have seen it. So if you have not seen Attachment, definitely seek that one out.
Yeah, worth your time. A little bit more familiar, we're back into Luca Guadagnino territory. Yeah, we've got Bones and All, which sends Timothée Chalamet into the...
Chalamet? Shamalama Ding Dong.
Rude.
No. Cannibalism as queerness.
Yes. So obviously cannibalism in general, but then also he has a moment where he picks up a queer, I guess, carnival / fair worker.
Because it's a period piece, right?
Yes, in the 90s.
Yeah. He picks up... I was conflicted about this because it's like, so I don't think the film ever states whether Chalamet's character is actually queer or if he's just doing this to like he basically, he tricks a gay... I was going to say carnival worker, to go blow him in a cornfield. And instead of doing that, he eats him.
Yeah. And
literally eats him.
Yeah.
Not his butt. He might eat his butt.
We don't see it. We don't know. Yeah, this is one of those interesting ones where, because it's a period piece, it could be seen as commentary. Like, Chalamet's character went after a vulnerable member of society because, this is someone who doesn't have a family. This is someone who doesn't have anyone who loves him. No one would care if this character goes missing.
Yes. And that's the thing. I think it helps that we have a queer director doing this. That's always something that I don't want to say it'd be worse if a straight man was doing this, but like it makes it an easier pill to swallow for me.
Sure.
But yeah, but I think that's the commentary, right? Like how society viewed us as queer people back in the 90s. Like, yeah, no one would miss him. But in the film, isn't he's closeted? He has a wife and kids, and that he has a wife and a baby, and that's what he didn't suspect.
Yes.
And my issue was that Timothée Chalamet's character was more he gets visibly upset when he sees that this man has a wife and child, as if that makes his life more valuable.
Yeah. Welcome back to the 90s.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the next one already. It is Husera, the Bone Woman, which is definitely the fun thing about festivals is these are movies that came to the festival last year, but many of us saw them for the first time this year. So Husera has technically just come out this year. In the running probably for my top 3, maybe top film of the year. Just absolutely fucking gorgeous. Such an interesting film. And the main character is a queer woman who has basically been told, hide your fucking queerness and marry a man.
Yeah. And that doesn't ever go well, just so y'all know.
No. It definitely doesn't go well in this movie.
So I actually haven't seen this one. Something in the Dirt. This is Benson and Moorhead.
Yes. So this is an interesting one. It's very lo-fi because, again, pandemic movie. So I think they shot it with just a couple of their friends in an apartment. It's got like some weird properties that changes the geography and so on. But yeah, we have a asexual character, and then we also have, I believe the other one is queer.
I'm glad. Okay, I didn't know that. I feel like asexual representation is very, very, very minimal. I think I've seen maybe one film this year with an actual ace character, but a lot of times too, it's asexual coded. It's never explicitly mentioned that they're asexual.
Yeah. I can't remember if we get like full confirmation in the film or not, but
yeah, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
Piggy, bullying.
Piggy. Yeah, so this is actually another feature developed from a short, and it takes the premise of the short and does expand upon it. So this is a nice one that if you've seen the short, you'll get something new from the feature. But this is basically fat shaming, bullying, and I do read this central character as queer because she, I think, has an interest in the other girls, but she's also willing to like let them get fucked by this man. Not literally, sorry. Get abducted and brutally tortured and murdered by this other man. And I think it's largely in part because, she's just had a terrible, terrible life.
Yeah, but I would argue maybe the queerest film that we saw last year was Carter Smith's Swallowed. And if y'all don't know who Carter Smith is, he's the director of his most well-known film was probably 2008's The Ruins. But he also did a very queer slasher entry in Hulu's Into the Dark. But Swallowed is an expansion of his short film Bug Crush, which if you have not seen Bug Crush, this is what got him the gig of The Ruins. And it's not a happy one.
No.
Be in the mood for it. But it's also very queer. And yeah, Swallowed sees the same thing where we're kind of doing like a drug run via bugs that you have to swallow. But we get something I've never seen in a film, a non-pornographic film, is a gay fisting scene.
Yes, yeah. Lots of hands going places we don't normally see on the silver screen.
Yeah.
And I mean, full confession, I've worked with Carter on a couple of different things, so he is a friend of mine, but I just find that this film is very confronting in a way that you just don't normally see. So I deeply respect his kind of commitment to the bit in that regard.
Well, the interesting thing about this movie, and full disclosure, this movie, I really like the first half of this movie when I do think it kind of matches the intensity of the Bug Crush short film, but Mark Patton is introduced in the film as kind of the drug kingpin in this. And what I appreciate and respect the fact that he has because the character is very flamboyant. He throws out lines like, you done dick teased the wrong queen, bitch. But I do think that adds an element of camp, which is very intentional on Carter Smith's part. But for me, it kind of ruins a lot of the intensity that was built up beforehand.
It changes the tone.
But I even asked myself, I was like, well, is that me being like, me projecting my internalized homophobia of like, well, an effeminate gay man can't be threatening. So it's something I've thought about a lot when discussing this film, I think.
Yeah, you had to have some deep thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of gay men have some internalized homophobia because, especially if you grew up in Texas like I did, because you're kind of like bred to do that.
Yeah.
All right, for this year, we're not going to go through like stuff because obviously y'all may not have seen them, but for queer horror or genre films, we've got Eileen, the Anne Hathaway, Thomas and McKenzie movie. Fucking great.
Really good.
Please watch it if you can. The trauma drag queen film Kill Dolly Kill. The trans film The People's Joker, which I did catch 2 nights ago and fucking loved it.
Yep. Yeah, we also have the Fantastic Golem Affair. We've got the restoration of The Strangler, Conan, which is by the French filmmaker who did After Blue. And then finally, You're Not Me, which I think Trace and I have... You're nearly done it, and I finished it this morning, and I will sign off on that.
Yeah. I still have 20 minutes left on my screener. Okay, so that's kind of the end of our listicle portion. We're going to have a slightly lengthier conversation about one particular film that I don't know if we had a slight reason for picking this, other than I think it was probably the most well-known, and this is 2014's The Town That Dreaded Sundown remake, sequel, maybe the original requel of the decade, I guess I want to say.
Yeah, we were trying to think about how does this actually get categorized, and it's a weird one because when you watch it in the wake of something like...
Who's seen it? All right, so brief walkthrough of this thing.
I was going to say, so Trace is wrong. This is not the most popular title.
I was like, Ryan Murphy, like, he's bad, but people watch his shit. Like, American Horror Story's on season 12?
Maybe more, yeah. So The Town That Dreaded Sundown takes place in Texarkana, which is the border between Texas and Arkansas.
Joe's from Canada, and he thinks that's a really weird thing.
It just does not roll off the tongue. It seems like a fake place to me.
Well, it's Texas and Arkansas.
Sure. Yeah.
It's quite literally a combination of the two names.
He's schooling me on geography. He thinks Canada is just one place.
I do. Did I say Joe from Canada?
Yeah.
He's from Toronto, which is in Ontario, which is in Canada.
He's getting there. So this movie is, it's interesting because it takes place in like, what, 20...
No, it takes place in 2014.
Yeah, okay. So it takes place in contemporary time, but it acknowledges that the prequel film.
The original film exists in the world of the film. So technically this remake, that's why it's hard to categorize, because it's not really a sequel to the original film, even though the sequel has its documentary aspects to it.
Yeah.
But it's about how the legacy of the true crimes and the original film kind of fucked this town over.
Yes.
It's not wholly successful because, again, these are very conservative areas of Texas and Arkansas. So it does this thing where, like, you'll be in a town hall meeting and it's like, town hall, the Arkansas side. Town hall, the Texas side. It doesn't really mean anything.
Well, it means that they have double of everything. And I think there's a couple of tension points in the film where you're meant to say, oh, this person's stepping on this person's toes. And as a result, they're not doing a good job of investigating who the Phantom could actually be.
And that's the thing. So we have the Phantom who... Some people think he might be the Phantom from the original murders, which isn't possible because he'd be 100 years old. But he starts killing people again. But yeah, this is a Ryan Murphy and Jason Blum co-production. Before, I think Jason Blum really... Well, no, he was already a name because he'd done Insidious and Paranormal Activity by this point.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to talk about this actually because there's a whole scene devoted to two band members who are giving fuck eyes each other at this like reception of a memorial thing. And they go off into a car junkyard to experiment with each other. They don't actually get to do anything before they get brutally murdered. But I don't know, there's a scene in this car where one of them's like, well, what are we supposed to do? And the other one goes, I don't know. And he just starts unbuckling his pants and he's like, could you like suck it? And again, when I saw this back then, I've never seen something like that before. But I think what I appreciated was these boys aren't confirmed to be gay, but they are experimenting.
Definitely experimenting. And they don't have a conversation about like, so you're the only other gay person in this small Texarkana town. It's not like that.
Well, we don't have enough time. Well, that's the issue. We don't have enough time for them to have that conversation. Has anyone seen the original Town That Dreaded Sundown? Okay, there's a really famous kill in that film. I think just because it's unique, it's called the trombone kill, where he ties up this girl to a tree and he attaches a blade to the end of a trombone and he starts playing it and just stabs her in the back over and over. So one of these boys gets that death. But he's bent over almost in a doggy style way when he gets killed. And I think for both of us, we were a little worried we were going to get like a knife rape.
Yeah, which is ironic because we both like Knife Plus Heart, and that's
which does have knife rape in it. But it's because when you have Ryan Murphy's name on something, you're kind of like, okay.
We should also note that the film was written by another gay man, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, and it's directed by Alfonso Gomez-Rejon. And is it Roberto Aguirre who did Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, or is it
one of them? Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's one of those things where when you see that there's not just like one, but two gay creatives involved in making a film, like you start to look for queer coding at least. And in this case, you don't get much of anything. Like it's actually a very heterosexual film for a large portion until you get these queer characters. So you start to think maybe we'll get a little bit more from this. And they're introduced solely so that they can be killed.
Here's the thing. So I don't mind this. I mean, look, would I have liked, because the issue is there is a straight sex scene from two non-characters about 20 minutes before this scene happens. And it's like, tits out, like bounce. It's like a borderline pornographic sex scene. And I guess watching it, I was surprised. I was like, why don't we get something like this? Given the fact that we have a queer writer, we have one queer producer. And I almost wonder if it's a thing where it's like, they're like, that the world isn't ready for that yet in this mainstream like remake of a classic. What we call the original, a well-known horror film, I think.
Yeah,
but again, it's made easier. I'm like, but at least we have these queer creators. It gave me something, but that's kind of shows how starved for content and representation we as queer viewers are. When we're like, oh, we'll take the little breadcrumb.
Yeah. Like, I defy people to actually pick up these characters' names. We had to go to IMDb and be like, okay, I recognize that actor and I recognize that guy.
Their names are Johnny and Roy.
Great. I mean, you could flesh that out to think about the rest of the film. There's a lot of instances where there's not really characters. There's people who get introduced and then they are murdered. Like that's kind of the film's MO. So we do have a final girl in Jamie. And here's the thing. We've got two heterosexual leads. We talked about boring protagonist syndrome. This is very much the case here. The acting is fine, but these characters are like, they're like sedatives on screen.
So they give this girl this stupid backstory where like her mom died, so she lives with the grandmother, played by Veronica Cartwright, by the way, who gets killed very unceremoniously.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm sure y'all have all seen I Know What You Did Last Summer, like the Julie James syndrome, where it's like, God, just shut the fuck up and solve the murders already.
She's so sad, everybody. Her life is really, really hard because she lost her mom, which has never happened in a horror film before.
But it's not the actress's fault. It's very much like the actress Addison Timlin. Like she does what she can with the most like dreadfully boring material. But it does bring the film down a lot because even though it's a slasher film, and actually a lot of people die by gunfire in this movie.
Well, yeah.
But I should say that trombone kill is probably the brutalest kill in the movie because you see the knife, like all the knife wounds in this kid's back.
Yeah, when we covered this in one of our Bloody Disgusting editorials, so we used to do columns back in the day.
And we turned that into the podcast.
Yeah, so this is one of the films that we actually covered, and we wanted to highlight how this scene was almost auspiciously? No,
what does
I'm
that
just
mean?
not going to say. This scene seemed to stand out to us as queer viewers more because it seems like the gay characters got the most brutal deaths in the film.
But I also think that just because, I want to say it's the most mainstream, although it got a botched release. Like it didn't get a wide theatrical release despite playing here.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure the queer scene had nothing to do with that.
I mean, honestly, probably
It might have.
Well, it's a very hard film to market in that way, right? Where you're saying, okay, so it's kind of like the movie you probably have already seen in the original Town That Dreaded Sundown, but it's new. And we should note it's actually a very stylish movie.
It's like a 3-star film for me. Like I like it, but I don't love it. But yeah, I think the best thing about it is the way it's shot. I feel like split diopter shots are becoming more and more common, but this is very much split diopter the movie.
Yeah, you could play a drinking game if you
but it
enjoy
works.
them. It helps to make it visually interesting.
Ooh, and there's a really good chase scene too. So Gary Cole's in it, and he's getting blown, and just gets a bullet through his head, and the girl that's blowing him has to run through the tall grass, and we get this great overhead shot of her going through, like crawling through the tall grass as the Phantom is going towards her. That to me, that's my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, it's really good. Like the army guy's death, he goes out to get something from the vending machine, and then his like decapitated head just gets launched
thrown through the window.
Room. And this poor woman who you find out is like Kendra or maybe Kim. It's like
Kate.
It's just like tits. Just has to like basically jump out the window.
Is she topless when this happens?
I think so.
I always get this scene confused with the one in My Bloody Valentine where that other girl like dies topless in the motel.
Oh, she's full bush in that one.
Yeah, oh yeah, that is full bush.
But yeah, this poor actress who is not a character and barely has a character name just has to like jump out a window and break a foot, and then she is like, oh, you're just dead. Okay.
But then again, that's going back to what I said earlier. It's like, okay, look, I love seeing sexuality movies. That's great. We get this quite graphic sex scene between this straight couple and nothing between these two boys who are experimenting. And honestly, even if for me, I don't know what you were like when you were coming into terms of your own sexuality, but like experimentation was something I did with a couple of my presumably straight friends, and so I related to this scene of these boys. I don't believe for 1 second two boys who are questioning their sexuality wouldn't know what to do when it came to blowjobs, but I appreciated it nonetheless, and so I related to that because I had a very similar experiences as a teenager.
Yes, multiple experiences.
Yeah.
Behind this movie theater.
I didn't live here.
Okay.
Although I did get caught in a car in an AMC parking lot once.
What we're saying is Trace is a sex offender, but he likes to see sexuality depicted on the big screen.
Can a minor be a sex offender?
I think it goes on your juvie record, but then it gets washed.
Shit.
So you're fine.
Anyway, but as shitty as I think Ryan Murphy's output is, I do
hot take.
No, I mean, look, I think Ryan Murphy's best things are the ones he's not directly involved in, where he's kind of like on the outskirts. Like I think like the American Crime Story stuff is really good. I think Feud, Betty and Joan is really good. Although actually he might have directed all that. So whoops.
It's when he's not writing stuff. That's usually when you get better quality stuff.
Or if it's like very contained, like it's not beyond one season or episode.
Yeah.
But as much as I don't like him, I do appreciate how much queerness he brings into the horror landscape specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's also one of those things where you watch this film and you think, oh, I wonder if that's why Veronica Cartwright is in this, because he also seems to favor actresses of a certain age who maybe haven't been working as steadily. And if this film had broken out...
Would we call Veronica Cartwright like a queer icon on the same level as like Jessica Lange?
Maybe not, but I feel like people have a fondness of her because of like her role in Alien and
Witches of Eastwick when she's vomiting all those cherry pits. That's a very queer movie. I love that movie.
It's true.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an okay film. The killer reveal sucks balls, and yeah,
it's kind of an oddity. Like you watch it and you think, there's potential here. Like it looks really well. Everybody is doing a reasonably okay performance. And yet at a certain point you will just feel like, where is the energy gone in this movie?
But that's where that lead character comes in though. Like it's like there's just like an energy suck in the middle section of this movie when and granted we get a great microfiche sequence because those exist in the world in 2014, I guess, apparently, in Texarkana, the Texas side.
Not the Arkansas side.
Actually it might be the Arkansas side. But yeah, it's for a slasher movie. And there are plenty of kills in it, but it also feels like they're really spaced out. Like there's a drag in the pacing of this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Anything else you want to say about this? I don't know. Go watch it. Maybe.
Like, as I said, it's a bit of an oddity. If you're hard pressed for something else, or maybe we've said something that catches your attention, like it's not the worst movie, and it's not incredibly long. I think it's like an hour 40 or something.
Yeah, it is.
So it's fine. It's aggressively fine.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, we hope that we have brought, all the films we talked about were all screened at Fantastic Fest, except for Assassination Nation. So hopefully, even maybe you took some notes on your food pads, but we've brought some films to your attention that you either hadn't heard of, didn't see, or maybe you have seen them all. I certainly haven't. I actually have some homework to do.
Yeah, no, the case with that. We can't even say that we were exhaustive because we probably missed one or two.
Yeah. But I mean, we have like 40-ish films that we talked about?
Yeah. You guys are probably totally exhausted, which is why we're now going to like open it up to a Q&A if you want to like ask us anything, because we have some time.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions?
This is where you pause because people need a moment.
Yeah, no. What?
What has surprised you the most about queer horror's evolution over the last decade, and where do you hope it goes next?
Hang on. So I'm going to repeat the question.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
For the recording. So the question was, what do we feel about the evolution of queer horror over the last decade or so?
It's always a thing for me where I'm like, I'm really, it's like those breadcrumbs that I'm talking about. Like, I'm really excited about it. I'm happy to see more of it, but it's also like, I want more. And I think that's why with Knife Plus Heart, like, that's kind of the one where I'm like, this is kind of like what I want. But the problem is something like that's just, it's not easy to market. So like, those also aren't going to be easy to finance.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a top shelf entry, but I think one of the other things for me that I've noticed, like even when we were putting together this list, the number of like North American produced films or even like mainstream big budget films, it's almost non-existent. So to me, the most interesting work that's coming out
is in Europe.
It's almost all international titles, and they look good. Like the quality has actually gotten to a point where you're not watching it and thinking, oh, this is... Yay, it's queer content, but it's also really fucking hard to watch because it's so inexpensive.
But that's also, too, where the Ryan Murphy... I mean, like, the last season of American Horror Story was NYC, and it was about, like, the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And, you know, your mileage may vary about how good you thought it was. I actually really did like it. But it's like, he is doing probably the most at putting queer horror out there and on the TV landscape especially.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think for films, the best things we're seeing are coming out of Europe and specifically France. I would like to see more of it come out of America. Like that's honestly, and that's why I think like with Carter Smith is doing really good work, and having that queer entry into the dark was really, really good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's still room to grow, I guess, is what I'll say.
Yeah. I would say the other promising thing is that it's not exclusively gay white men that we're seeing as the representation for queerness.
Yeah.
That was fun for a while, and then it got really fucking old because it's like we didn't want to acknowledge that queer women existed. We're actually starting to see some bisexuals.
Well, actually,
shocking.
So we have an episode on Showgirls where we talk about the male gaze a lot, you know, and like how you're like watching women and like what's the male gaze, these booty shots. And we had a lesbian on our show who clocked both of us and was like, I think they're all really hot. So it's not just the male gaze. It's like, it is a female gaze sometimes, even if a man's doing it. So I don't know. I find all those conversations really, really interesting. That might have been too much of a tangent of the question we had, but I like talking about that.
Representation. We're seeing more of it, and it's promising.
Anyone else? Yes. Oh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Repeat the question.
So what do we think of drag superstars entering into the world of film or mainstream film even? But there was a part B to that question.
Well, I think what you're talking about is like different sorts of films and people crossing over into one another's territory. And I think for a lot of folks, you know, we talked about Ryan Murphy. You could say, well, Drag Race and even the Boulet brothers too. Like,
I think the Boulet brothers. Well, again, like Kill Dolly Kill screening here is a drag trauma film, and it's interesting. So I find a lot to like about that movie, but it's also like it's trauma, so it's not mainstream. Like I feel like that's a harder thing to bring into. God, I don't want to say regular audiences. But then also like something like, I don't know, I like RuPaul's Drag Race, but I also feel like that's that is the most mainstream version of drag we are seeing. And I really like it when they do like a horror-y thing. But I always also feel like when there's a horror queen on Drag Race, like they never get as much respect as the others, which is why I really appreciate what the Boulet brothers are doing. I wish they had the platform that RuPaul did. But do I want to see more drag queens like in cinema and doing things like that? Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course we got one just a couple of years ago with Death Drop Gorgeous.
Oh yeah, Death Drop Gorgeous, and that's also a really fun one too. Okay, but I think the thing is though, I also want to see a lot of these productions are very low budget, and so it forces the creators to be creative. For lack of a better term.
They have to innovate.
Yeah, they have to innovate. I would like to see what they can do with some money. The problem is I mean, I'm not in the film financing industry, but I'm kind of like, I feel like it's really hard to get a financing for a drag queen horror film.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is like some of the titles that I've really responded to or gravitated to in the last couple of years have been Shudder acquisitions. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as I mentioned off the top, we're seeing different types of platforms emerging which can host varied content. So, the fact that the Boulet brothers have a show on
Season
Shudder
5 starting next month
suggests that maybe there's money there, but also I don't know about film financing either, so I don't know how much money Shudder can give to people. But I mean, one of the things that I think is really promising about something like drag queens coming into horror is that it gets to shine a talent. Like we get to see their drag on a completely different medium, which might then introduce horror fans to drag, but also then vice versa. So I think there's exciting opportunities there.
And that's the thing, right? Because like again, as much as I said, like RuPaul is like very mainstream, but like I think it's bringing people into this side. But also, drag and trans lives are under attack right now. Like all these drag laws, these anti-drag, especially in Texas right now. I moved to Colorado last year, and I weep seeing these headlines every day. But I think I'm maybe doing a tangent again, but I feel like drag content also it's very boundary pushing. It's transgressive, and it's kind of like a 2 steps forward, one step back thing where I don't think that's going to make it easier for people who are anti-drag to accept drag, but I don't want drag to change as an art form to appease those people.
Well, I think it's inherently too political as well. So like try telling a drag queen not to do something and you're just going to get like a giant round of fuck you.
But at the same time though, we have like drag friend like children's story hour, drag queen story hour, where it's like there's nothing sexual. They are family friendly events.
Yeah.
But just for some people, the fact that it's a man in drag is the offensive part of that. But I think it's really people show their asses, I think, when they come down on drag, and it's like,
they want to make it sexualized. And like, sure, some of it absolutely is. But particularly when you start to see drag performers moving into more mainstream spaces, they're doing like cabaret acts. They're doing, children's daytime reading. Like they're suiting the medium or the setting in which they're performing. Like, you just don't hire a certain drag queen to maybe read to children if you don't want that content.
Or just tell her there's children in the audience. I hope we answered that question. Anything else? Yes. Yeah, so the question is, representation matters, but are we worried about exploitation when it comes to queer representation, or I guess used to sell a film or a property?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we have seen that before. I mean, I'm hard-pressed to think of a specific example right now, but I think at this 5 years ago, I would say I don't give a fuck, because as long as I'm seeing something, like that's what matters. I do think though, like, queerness as a representation, it can be commodified, the word I want to say.
I would say the flip side for me of the progress we've been seeing is when I continue to see the sexless, honestly, it's usually the gay best friend.
Yeah.
And it really gets my back up with it because, we're at a stage where the work has been done. We've seen really fully fleshed out 3-dimensional queer characters, particularly in horror. Like horror is the best genre for introducing like queerness, women, just like all different types of representation. Like we're the ones at the forefront. And when I see people who are like, and he's got like a gay lesbian, like You're just like, okay, but do they have a character arc? Do they get to do anything? Like, I don't want to see them if they're just showing up to be like, hey girl, what's up?
Well, but can you think of a film though, or a TV show even, where like, yeah, the queerness was like put forth front and center in the marketing campaign, but it wasn't. They didn't deliver on that promise in the final product?
Not off the top of my head. But I'd be curious to know if that struck a chord with anyone.
I mean, I might be digging myself into a hole here, but like, I think that the Freaky that came out last year? 2 years ago. Queer writer, queer director. There is a non-binary best friend in it who a lot of people really, really, really gravitated to and like loved and stuff. And I'm happy that people find like relatability in that character. But to me, that was the thing for me. That just seemed like the queer or queer best friend who had nothing really to do besides just be the queer best friend.
Yeah, it's too much of a throwaway character. And maybe part of the issue that we have is that we went in expecting more because of the people who were making the project. Mm-hmm. So we were like, oh, okay, we're really going to get to see it shine. And instead it felt like maybe, I think it wasn't that it was in the marketing, but it was in maybe, I don't want to say selling out, but it was the compromise being made to make a more mainstream film. It was like, well, no, you can't have the queer character be the lead. You can't have them do something significant, but you can have them there. But we're going to need you to have like the blonde hot girl be the lead.
But I also think though, when we're talking about, we would love having queer characters that just are queer, but it's not really the focal point of the film or their arc or whatever. That is really good. But I've also seen people complain about that and being like, yeah, but like, what's like, there should be more of a I don't know. I think it's didactic sometimes because I feel like it can sometimes feel preachy if it's like it has to feel organic to the product. And I think there are many times where it doesn't feel organic to the product.
Yeah, like, I mean, we talked about there's someone inside your house where it's like, yeah, and there's just like a throwaway character. Sure. Okay. And we see a lot of that as we see, I want to say the CW-fication of horror. Like in the 2000s and into the 2010s, we saw a lot of just, okay, make sure you've got your black friend, make sure you've got your queer friend.
Well, actually, a big one from '98, Bride of Chucky. Like Bride of Chucky, of course, Chucky's created by queer creator Don Mancini, but like there's a gay character in that movie who is gay. It's made very well known. He gets a brutal fucking death. Mm-hmm. But like, I mean, that was a really integral part of your coming out was like that character.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, it's not the most fleshed out character, but the fact that this character fully admitted, like, yeah, I'm super gay and I had to break up with my boyfriend, but I'm going to try to help my friend. Like, it's similar to Tammy and the T-Rex in that fashion, right? Where these were the things that I think were more acceptable at a certain time. And then now I'm not willing to settle for that anymore.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Frightened us? Oh, I know mine.
So the question was, what was the last film that we saw that really frightened us?
Oh, and mine's a queer one. So mine, this is going to be divisive. Mine is The Outwaters. This is a film it's queer directed, queer written, queer shot, queer lead, queer sound designed. Definitely not for everyone, but I got really high the first time I watched it, and it's a 2-hour found footage movie, but this group of people that go into the desert to film a music video, and they basically wander into hell. And I was so scared of this movie that I wanted to get up and like check the runtime on it, and I was too afraid to get up and like walk across my living room to check the runtime on this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because The Outwaters and then also Skinamarink are both queer horror texts, mm-hmm. And both very boundary pushing in terms of like found footage. So it's exciting to see. That to me is one of those examples where it doesn't have to be fully mainstream. It doesn't have to be billions of dollars, right? Like,
well, but also with The Outwaters. So has anyone seen The Outwaters? Okay. So the lead actor, who's the one that does all of this stuff in this movie, is a queer man. And the character is queer. I actually don't know if that's made explicit in the film proper.
Not in the like theatrical cut.
But on the Blu-ray, there are 2 short films that act as prequels to the film. And one of them is basically a lead into the film about how he has just broken up with his boyfriend. And that's his headspace when the movie starts. And again, it's a thing where I'm like, oh, I wish this would have been in the movie. But then like, how are you going to add more to this nearly 2-hour found footage film? So I like that it's there as an Easter egg if you have it. Do I wish it was incorporated in the film a little bit more? Maybe. Am I happy there's not any kind of anti-queer stuff in the hellscape? Because I think that could have been something you could have easily played with in that film.
Sure, absolutely.
What about you?
So I'm like one of those sad, annoying edgelords where I'm just like, oh, things don't really scare me anymore. So I will say things make me jump, or I really like particular sequences. That's more of my jam these days. So I'm going to shout out a film that I saw at TIFF that hasn't come out yet, but it's a Saudi Arabian film called Naga. And it's about a woman who has to get home before her father-mandated curfew. And if she doesn't, it's like she will probably be killed, because that's the society that she lives in. Except the problem is that she's a contemporary woman and she's got a secret boyfriend and she wants to go to a rave in the desert, and a bunch of shit happens that just keeps delaying her. So you've got a ticking clock, and then at one point they run into a rabid camel, and it is the most harrowing, like, tense sequence I have seen in a horror film this fucking year.
Like, is the camel prominent in this movie, or is it just this one scene?
It's actually two sequences, because she gets knocked out, and then we flash back to a different time, and then we come back, and she still has to deal with it. It's like probably a 10-minute sequence, but like, I know you're all like, it's a camel.
No, doesn't that make it more intriguing? I gotta see this. I have to see this.
The way that it's shot, it's like almost all from her point of view. So you're often seeing the camel's legs as it's like stomping and snorting, and it's very disorienting, like handheld camera action. So, yeah, honestly, I fucking love that movie. It's Naga, Naga.
Oh, they said MAGA.
Not MAGA. That's a different horror film.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before we shut this down? Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much. This has been a real delight to talk about with y'all. I guess we can cross out this appearance.
Absolutely. Yes. Cross out horror queers at Fantastic Fest.